We're making good progress. Day by day, we're getting a little bit further. So now we're going to look at Chapter 9, the end of Book 2. And Chapter 9 is called Drama. And as we pointed out in an annotation in Chapter 8, the names of some of these chapters I think are a little problematic, and this has nothing to do with Wraith 20th Anniversary Edition. It has everything to do with how Storyteller has been presented to us over the years. We have a chapter called Rules, which is going over the basic considerations of the Storyteller system. We have a chapter called Systems, which is talking about the basic concepts of the type of character that you play. And then we have a chapter called Drama, which has all the procedures and things that people would normally think of as rules or mechanics or mechanisms bundled together with procedures for implementing them, which I think of as a system. So, some shuffling of these names might be helpful in how people approach a book like this, because people do tend to read them out of order, flipping through. I think it's a skill to approach. I learned study skill, let's say, to approach a book from the first and work your way through to the end. But anyway, so 7, 8, and 9. Chapter 9, Drama. This is where you get to work sorting through a monstrous amount of what works out to be practical examples of putting the Storyteller system to work for you. How do I do things? How do I resolve things? What's the best way to implement the system? That kind of stuff. So we open up on page 313 with the drama section, and it's pretty much a full page, and it starts with a sidebar talking about role-playing, R-O-L-E, and role-playing. All right, so this is a very specific message to you right up front that you're looking to reduce the number of roles, to increase the significance of the roles that you do ask for. All right? So it says, first sentence, the more dice rolls you can avoid through role-playing, the better. The first word of the next sentence is immersing, which is one of those trigger words. It's a word I like, and I like what they do with it here because they're representing what I believe is the correct way to use it. Immersing the players in story is central to a successful Wraith Chronicle. All right? So you must immerse in something. That might be character, that might be the esprit de corps of the group, it might be the nitty-gritty of the mechanics, right? It might be the story, as is indicated here. The problem, and there is a problem, is that they're not just saying, as we go through the entirety of the book, the thing that's programming us about how to play, immerse in story. They're saying story is important, but they keep pushing the idea that we should be playing in character. And it may seem like those things aren't mutually exclusive, but an exploration of them shows that they diverge in significant and important ways. Specifically, if someone's telling you to play in character, to experience things as if the world were real, and then telling some of the players that it's okay for them to cheat, and that it's okay for them to narrate how events are going to happen. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I don't want to put undue priority on any particular way to play. I want to specify that there are different ways to play and they don't blend together. But you can accidentally write about them in a way that blends them together, and that causes confusion. It gives people trouble. It gives them reason to have friction or pushback when they're reading what you write. So they're paying more attention to their complaint than what you're saying, and it leads people to not understand what you're actually saying. So clarity is a virtue. If only I had some. All right, so chapter 9 opens up with a description, right? It says Wraith is about telling a shared story through role-playing. Some structure is required so that the more dramatic aspects of the game flow smoothly. And by drama here, they're talking about tension, which is a more commonly used word for things that make you want to roll dice, or things where you have to, actually make some kind of test. I have people agree that this is what's going to happen next. All right, so let's read that again. While Wraith is about telling a shared story through role-playing, some structure is required so that the more dramatic aspects of the game flow smoothly. And the rules from Chapter 3 provide the framework for what to do when a roll is required. Sort of. You're going to get more of that framework here. But it's helpful to have reference for specific situations that occur frequently, and this chapter fleshes out the standard dramatic systems common to most chronicles. So even here they're calling this the systems chapter. But anyway, so we open up with time. Very good place to start with, I think. Once again, we revisit these terms that we were taught before. We were given a lexicon of these terms before. We've got the turn, the scene, the chapter, the story, the chronicle, and downtime. We revisit them again. Then the next thing is action scenes. Now that we understand these things in context, let's begin with scenes, because that's how you're actually going to begin. You're going to open up with a scene of some kind. So we've got action scenes first, because that's the first thing people are going to panic about probably. And then that follows with organizing action. Then there's role-playing action, okay? And it's very good that these are separated. This is the kind of thing that I like to see, right? So the organizing action section is basically telling you where in this chapter to look to do specific things. The role-playing action is suggestion. It's that vagueness that we get into in books like this about description, right? The advice here is describe it. Basically, that's what it boils down to. And that takes practice. This book can't give you the ability to do that. It could perhaps use some of its page count to talk about examples, and it does. So good on them. Initiative, right? Go. Initiative section is a couple of paragraphs describing how it works and what is required for that call for initiative to have value. Like what sort of things you need to be aware of in the scene around the characters, right? That the window into the world is the words of the storyteller and the words of their fellow players as action begins to happen. So this is a verbal medium, right? It comes through our language. And so this initiative section, 4 or 5 paragraphs, is focusing us on what we need to talk about before the dice start to fly. It's really good. Excellent. Then we get into an action and combat overview. Just a couple of paragraphs again. They're setting us up to understand what comes next. Strong positives for me. And then we have resolution. So to go over that again, right? We have our section here is action scenes. So what is an action scene? Organizing action, what we need to know. Role-playing through the action, what makes it more than just rolling dice. Initiative, right? Setting the stage properly for action. And then the action in combat, followed by resolution. So now we're ready to get on page 315 to the actual dramatic systems, the actual procedures for when things happen. So what kind of stuff do they have in here? Well, they open up with automatic feats, things that you should just be able to do. So above and beyond the automatic success rule, these are the things to never call for a roll for. So I like the fact that they're right up here up front, right? You don't need to roll for any of the following things. It's cool. Then we get into physical feats, things, this is more descriptive, things like we would cover in the systems chapter that we just did. How much can you actually carry? How far can you climb when you climb? How difficult is it to climb things? Driving, how that works. There's a sidebar on aircraft, which is cool. These things coming in from Wraith Great War, right? We have a list of different relic vehicles and all their information all on one page on 319, right? So we can see how quickly they can go, how easy they are to maneuver, how easy they are to destroy, that kind of thing. We have all kinds of little systems, like somebody wants to hotwire a car, someone wants to break in somewhere, you have to jump a specific distance, lifting items, open and closing things that aren't simple, and so on and so forth, right? Lots and lots of different things. It's alphabetized, you can just go through. You know it's a physical thing, so then you find the thing that you're trying to do in the list, short lists. And there's mental feats, same situation. There's a handful of charts to give you an idea, like I want to change a flat tire. How hard is that? I want to figure out the source of a technical glitch, right? So we have a comparison of difficulty, and we have the number of successes that might be required. Now, there is a slight problem with all of this. We talked about successes before, right? 1 success is a marginal success, 3 successes is a complete success, that sort of thing. But there is an optional rule that used to not be optional, which is extended roles, right? So things that you can't just do, right? Like smash a window, or pull open a loosely locked door, that kind of stuff. This is something like figuring out someone's combination lock, or sawing through a heavy chain, right? Things that are going to take time. It could be an automatic success if you had enough time, but you don't, so you need to roll. So then the amount of time you use and the amount of time that you can reduce becomes important, which is the function of an extended roll. You get multiple rolls with your die pool looking for a larger than normal number of successes. Right? But in here, they talk about things that are extended rolls without making a note that these things are extended rolls and that extended rolls are optional. So that could be confusing for some. It's not an insurmountable problem, but it's there. All right. So then we get into combat. Combat is realistically expected to be the most involved, and it will have the most exceptions, right? So combat goes with types of combat, right? So we can keep them clear in our head. Combat terms, they give you a quick chart, something that you would probably expect to see on the screen, right? What stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 of any combat turn. And then they explore that. So stage 1 is initiative, stage 2 is describing and dealing with the action, and then stage 3 is the resolution. What's the outcome of that particular turn? I did it again, turn. So then we wind up with damage types. It's a good place for it after a combat section. What are the types of damage you can take? This is a review from before. How can we avoid it? Right. So we've got soak, then we have armor, then we have the corpus, the capacity to take damage for objects. We've already talked about in an earlier chapter how wraiths deal with incoming damage. Then we go to combat maneuvers. Okay. There's really no good, perfect, ideal order for these things, so that's fine. So we get combat maneuvers, different things you can do. Now, you don't have to do combat maneuvers, in a sense. There's no specific thing that you ideally need to roll, right? You already know, right? You've got a brawl skill, so you're going to use your brawl die pool. You've got a firearm skill, you're going to use your firearms, or melee, or what have you. It's easy enough to figure out, and you can just do it that way. But here allows you to get into more detail. And then there's some optional stuff also provided in here, such as flying maneuvers and crouching, things that you can use to replicate martial arts, which, again, lets you stage things up. So in terms of scalability, we can strip Wraith down to a very simple level with simple rules for the shadow, simple rules for harrowing, simple rules for combat, and get people playing it. And then as they get comfortable with the setting and each other and shadow guiding and everything that Wraith is, then you can slowly, story by story perhaps, stage up things that we can keep learning so that we can get to a level of very detailed play with ease. So this particular edition makes that simple. They do all the work for you in most cases. Right? So we go through all the combat maneuvers, attacking maneuvers, and defensive maneuvers, and there's quite a number. Then we get into ranged maneuvers. And these are, maneuvers is a pretty broad term. It's things like firing multiple shots, reloading your weapon, doing break falls, clawing somebody, wrestling on the ground, trying to get somebody in a clinch, this kind of stuff. It just makes it really simple. Nobody has to think about it. They can just look at it. But it's easy enough to make a ruling on any of those anyway. But why reinvent the wheel, right? A more than 20-year-old wheel. And that is the end. The last 2 pages are charts for the different ranged weapons, and that's it. So this is, again, one of those like library chapters where you can just go to get specific information about a thing. It's laid out very easily to find. If you're using the PDF, you're just going to click the item in the table of contents and be here. If you're using the book, it will probably tend to fall open somewhere around these pages. Anyway, we're just past the middle, and this is a chapter that gets a lot of use. So I've got really no meaty complaints here. I'm quite satisfied, and it has a pretty consistent tone. Where it has a shortcoming is just forgetting that a lot of the things that used to be a standard part of the system have been moved into the optional band, right? And for older and experienced players, they're just going to use those things and not treat them as optional anyway, so there's no problem with this chapter. But for people who have decided to leave those things out, they're going to have to make those decisions over and over and over again themselves as they go through these systems, deciding what to use and not. So, if the goal of this book was to speak directly to new players, that could have been done better. If the goal of it was to, be welcoming to people who already play, then it's perfectly fine. So anyway, this ends our coverage of book 2, and we'll be doing an overview, looking back through, now you have read book 1 and book 2, which will then follow up with book 3 and the end of things. So we're getting close to the end of the series. If you've stuck with me this far, thanks.